For 4 years I paid for everything. The wedding hall, the honeymoon, the house down payment, the temporary loans that never came back. And every time I helped, my son-in-law would smile, that tight, polished smile, the kind that never reaches the eyes. Behind my back, though, he had a different name for me. I didn't know it at first. I found out by accident. One evening, I went to pick up some documents I'd left at their place. The door was half open. I heard laughter, his friends, whiskey glasses clinking. That's when I heard him say it. "Relax, man. The old man with the open wallet will handle it. He always does." Laughter exploded in the room. Someone added, "What happens when he runs dry?" My son-in-law laughed the loudest. "Then I'll remind him how much his daughter needs us." I stood there, holding those papers, feeling something inside me go very quiet. Not angry, not yet, clear. From that day on, I stopped correcting him, stopped arguing, stopped warning my daughter. I started watching. I documented everything. The money I gave, the lies he told. The business he claimed was struggling while he upgraded his car. The credit cards in my daughter's name that he used. The messages, the voice notes. 4 years of disrespect deserved patience, not rage. Then came the family dinner. His idea. Thank you dinner, he said, for everything I'd done. The table was full. Relatives. Smiles, phones ready for photos. Halfway through dessert, he raised his glass. "I just want to say," he announced, "that we're lucky to have such a generous father-in-law." I stood up. Calm. Polite. "I agree," I said. "And since we're appreciating honesty tonight, I thought I'd share something too." I connected my phone to the TV. The room went silent. First played the audio. The old man with the open wallet. Laughter died instantly. Then screenshots, then bank transfers, then dates, then amounts. I turned to him. 4 years, I said evenly. You called me old. You called me stupid. You treated my help like entitlement. I looked at my daughter, eyes wide, trembling. "And you," I said softly, "were never supposed to find out like this, but you deserve the truth. No shouting, no insults, just facts." He tried to speak. Nothing came out. I picked up my coat. "One last thing," I said at the door. "My wallet is officially closed. 3 months passed. No calls, no messages. Then one evening, my phone rang, my daughter crying. He'd lost the house. The business never existed. Debt collectors were calling. Friends vanished. Family turned cold. And him. He was sitting beside her. Silent, broken. When I arrived, he stood up, didn't look me in the eye. And then slowly he bent forward. "I was wrong," he whispered. "I need your help." I looked at him. Really looked. Then I said, "I'll help my daughter. I'll help my grandchild someday. But you?" I paused. "You'll learn what it's like to stand on your own, without an open wallet to hide behind." I turned to my daughter. "My door was never closed to you." And for the first time in 4 years, I walked away lighter, not because I had less money, but because I finally had my dignity back. For 4 years, the disrespect didn't arrive loudly. It didn't announce itself with shouting or obvious cruelty. It crept in quietly, disguised as jokes, smiles, and polite thank yous that never quite carried real gratitude. At first, it felt harmless, small comments brushed aside for the sake of family peace. A joke about age here, a casual remark about money there. "You're old school," the son-in-law would say with a laugh. "You don't mind helping, right?" And because helping had always been part of who I was, because I believed family meant support without counting, I ignored the faint sting those words carried. I paid for things I was never supposed to. Not because I was asked directly, but because expectation hung in the air. If the rent was short, the call came to me. If the car broke down, I was the solution. If a business idea just needed a little push, my savings became the push. Each time, the gratitude was brief, almost rehearsed. A quick thank you, followed immediately by another need. Over time, I noticed something unsettling. My help was no longer seen as generosity. It was assumed, budgeted, relied upon as if it were an entitlement rather than a choice. What hurt wasn't the money. It was the way I slowly disappeared as a person and became a resource. Conversations stopped being about my health, my thoughts, my life. They revolved around payments, plans, and future expenses. When I spoke, he half listened. When I advised caution, he smiled and did the opposite. And when others were around, his tone changed entirely, friendly, charming, respectful. The kind of man people praised as ambitious and confident. Only when I wasn't the focus did the mask slip. Just enough to remind me where I truly stood. The worst part was how invisible the disrespect was to everyone else, including my own daughter. She saw a hard-working husband under pressure. She saw a father who enjoyed helping. She didn't hear the jokes made when I wasn't in the room. She didn't see the messages where my name was followed by dollar signs instead of respect. I carried that knowledge alone, convincing myself that endurance was the price of being a good parent. That if I kept the peace, things would eventually balance out. They never did. Each year, the gap between how I was treated publicly and privately grew wider. In front of family, he praised my generosity. Behind closed doors, I was reduced to a role, an old man whose only value was an open wallet. The phrase itself was cruel not because of its words, but because of its truth. That's how he saw me. Not as a father who sacrificed, not as a man who worked decades to build stability, but as a convenient solution to his own irresponsibility. And the longer it went on, the clearer it became that respect would never come on its own. Still, I stayed quiet. Not out of weakness, but out of love for my daughter and the fragile structure of family we were all pretending was solid. I watched the patterns repeat. Money left my account, excuses filled the air, promises of repayment turned into jokes, gratitude turned into impatience whenever I hesitated. And somewhere along the way I realized something important. Silence was being mistaken for stupidity. Kindness was being interpreted as permission. That realization changed everything. The disrespect wasn't accidental. It wasn't temporary stress or misunderstanding. It was learned behavior, reinforced by 4 years of consequences that never arrived. Every time I paid, every time I forgave, every time I stayed silent, the message was clear: you can take and nothing will happen. That understanding settled deep inside me, heavy but clarifying. I didn't need to confront him in anger. I didn't need to demand apologies that would never be sincere. What I needed was patience, because patience would allow the truth to reveal itself fully. By the end of those 4 years, I knew exactly who I was to him. And more importantly, I knew who I was not. I was not weak. I was not blind. And I was done allowing my dignity to be quietly drained alongside my bank account. The moment didn't arrive with drama or confrontation. It came quietly, almost casually, the way truth often does when it isn't trying to be found. I hadn't gone there with suspicion in my heart or anger on my mind. I was only stopping by to collect a folder of documents I had forgotten during my last visit. The house felt unfamiliar that evening, filled with voices that didn't belong to family. Laughter spilled through the hallway, loose and careless, the kind that only comes when people believe they are completely safe from being overheard. I paused when I recognized his voice. It wasn't what he said at first, but how he said it, relaxed, confident, stripped of the polite respect he always wore around me. He sounded comfortable, untouchable. As I stood there, half hidden by the doorframe, I realized I was hearing the version of him that never came out in front of me. This was who he was when he didn't think I mattered. Someone mentioned money, a vacation plan, a new purchase that clearly cost more than what he had ever admitted earning. That's when he laughed and said it, the phrase that turned my blood cold. Not because it was surprising, but because it explained everything. The old man with the open wallet will handle it. The words landed easily, followed by laughter that felt sharp and unfiltered. No hesitation, no shame, just certainty. In that single sentence, years of confusion aligned into something painfully clear. This wasn't stress talking. This wasn't frustration. This was strategy. I wasn't helping a struggling family. I was being used as a financial guarantee, a backup plan for his recklessness. I waited, listening longer than I should have. Every word that followed only confirmed what that first sentence revealed. Jokes about how I never said no. Comments about how I worried too much but paid anyway. One of his friends even asked what would happen if I ever refused. He didn't hesitate before answering. He laughed again and said I wouldn't. That I cared too much about my daughter to risk conflict. That I was predictable. That hurt more than the insult itself. Not because he thought I was old. Not because he thought I was generous to a fault. But because he thought I was weak. He believed my love could be weaponized against me, and he had built his life around that belief. Standing there, I felt a strange calm settle over me. The anger didn't explode the way movies make it seem. Instead, it folded inward, sharp and focused. I didn't feel the urge to burst into the room or demand an explanation. I felt something far more dangerous, clarity. I walked away quietly, the documents forgotten. On the drive home, my hands didn't shake. My thoughts were steady, almost methodical. I replayed every interaction of the past 4 years, and suddenly they made sense. The rushed calls, the carefully timed emergencies, the moments when gratitude seemed forced like a performance, the dismissive smiles when I offered advice. None of it was random. It was all part of a pattern I had refused to name. That night, I didn't confront my daughter. I didn't call him. I didn't even tell myself I'd stop helping immediately. Instead, I made a decision that would shape everything that followed. If he believed I was careless, I would let him continue believing that. If he thought I wasn't paying attention, I would use that assumption to my advantage. From that point on, I listened more than I spoke. I saved messages instead of deleting them. I noted dates, amounts, inconsistencies. I paid attention to what he said when he was comfortable, and what changed when money was involved. Every small lie became a thread in a much larger fabric. I wasn't collecting evidence out of spite. I was collecting truth, patiently, quietly, waiting for the moment when it would matter most. The overheard insult didn't break me. It sharpened me. It stripped away any lingering doubt about his intentions and replaced it with resolve. I understood then that respect would never come from confrontation alone. It would come from exposure, from allowing others to see the same man I had just seen, unguarded and unapologetic. And as I went to bed that night, I knew something he didn't. He thought he had all the control. But control belongs to the one who sees clearly and stays silent long enough to act wisely. Once the truth settled in, anger never became my guide. I didn't confront him, didn't raise my voice, didn't demand explanations that would only be wrapped in excuses. I understood something important in those quiet days that followed. Rage burns fast and leaves nothing useful behind, but patience collects power. If I acted too soon, he would deny everything. He would twist words, blame stress, claim jokes were misunderstood. And worse, my daughter would be forced to choose sides before she had seen enough to understand what was really happening. I refused to let emotion sabotage clarity. So instead, I observed. Every interaction became information. Every request, every promise, every delay in repayment was something to be noted, not argued over. When he asked for money, just until next month, I agreed calmly and saved the message. When next month came and went, I saved the excuse too. When he spoke about his business, I listened carefully, comparing what he said today to what he claimed last week. The contradictions revealed themselves without effort. People who lie often forget the details of their own stories, and he was no exception. I organized everything quietly. Bank transfers with dates and amounts. Screenshots of messages where urgency was emphasized, then casually forgotten once the money arrived. Voice notes where confidence replaced desperation the moment his problem was solved. I didn't alter anything. I didn't add commentary. I let his own words stand exactly as he had spoken them, because truth doesn't need decoration to be devastating. What surprised me most was how easy it became once I removed emotion from the process. I was no longer hoping he would change or suddenly show gratitude. I was simply recording reality as it unfolded. Each piece of evidence felt less like revenge and more like insurance. I wasn't planning to hurt him. I was preparing to protect myself, and more importantly, to protect my daughter from a future built on deception. There were moments of temptation. Times when he smiled too confidently, when he made another casual remark that reduced my help to expectation, when I wanted to remind him that everything he had rested on my restraint. But I stayed quiet. Silence, I learned, made people careless. He believed he was untouchable. He believed I was still the same man, soft, unaware, endlessly forgiving. That belief gave him the freedom to expose himself completely. I noticed patterns emerging. Money requests often followed arguments he had with my daughter. Large expenses appeared right after he spoke about tight months. He painted himself as responsible while quietly shifting every risk onto me. The clearer the pattern became, the more I realized this wasn't just disrespect, it was financial manipulation. And it had been happening in plain sight, hidden only by my willingness to trust. I also paid attention to my daughter. Not her words, but her exhaustion. The way she hesitated before checking her phone. The way her voice lowered whenever money was mentioned. I saw how carefully he controlled the narrative around her, how he framed his failures as shared burdens and his successes as personal triumphs. This wasn't just about my dignity anymore. It was about stopping a cycle that would only grow more damaging with time. By the time weeks turned into months, I had a complete picture. Not fragments, not assumptions. A clear, undeniable record of who he was when he thought no one was watching. I wasn't collecting ammunition for a fight. I was building a mirror, one he would eventually be forced to look into, whether he liked it or not. What made this approach powerful wasn't the volume of evidence, but the restraint behind it. I never hinted at what I knew. I never changed my behavior enough to raise suspicion. I continued to help selectively, just enough to maintain the illusion. Every dollar I gave after that moment was a conscious investment, not in him, but in the truth. Because when the time came, I wanted there to be no room for denial, no space for excuses, and no way for him to escape the reality he had so carefully created. In choosing evidence over anger, I reclaimed control. I shifted from being a passive source of support to an active observer of reality. And in doing so, I laid the foundation for a reckoning that wouldn't rely on shouting or threats, but on something far more powerful, his own actions, presented without distortion, for everyone to see. The dinner was his idea, which made it almost poetic. He called it a family gathering, a small celebration to thank everyone for their support. The invitation was warm, enthusiastic, carefully worded to sound sincere. He insisted it be at a nice restaurant, one with soft lighting and enough space to seat the entire family comfortably. I agreed without hesitation. By then, I understood the value of letting people believe they were in control. That evening, the table was full. Relatives filled the seats with chatter and laughter. Glasses clinked, and plates arrived one after another. From the outside, it looked like any other happy family dinner. He played his role perfectly, polite, attentive, smiling at the right moments. He even pulled out my chair, a gesture that would have seemed respectful to anyone who didn't know better. My daughter sat beside him, relaxed, unaware of what the night would become. I watched them quietly, feeling neither nervous nor angry. I felt prepared. As the meal went on, stories were shared. Someone brought up the early days of their marriage, how difficult things had been, how lucky they were to have family support. He nodded along, adding just enough detail to make himself look hardworking and grateful. When the waiter cleared the main courses and dessert arrived, he stood up, glass in hand. The room gradually fell silent, expecting a toast. He spoke confidently, praising family, sacrifice, and generosity. Then he looked directly at me and smiled. "I just want to thank my father-in-law," he said. "He's always been there for us. Truly generous." There it was, the moment he believed would seal the performance. I stood up slowly, matching his calm. "Thank you," I said, my voice steady. "Since we're sharing appreciation tonight, I thought I'd share something as well." I took out my phone and connected it to the screen behind us, the one meant for photos and memories. A few people smiled, assuming this was another sentimental gesture. My daughter looked confused but curious. The first thing that played was his voice, clear, unedited. "The old man with the open wallet will handle it." The laughter that followed in the recording echoed briefly, before dying under the weight of silence in the room. Faces turned. Some looked at me. My daughter's expression changed instantly, confusion melting into disbelief. I didn't rush. I let the silence breathe. Then came the messages, dates, amounts, requests followed by excuses, promises followed by nothing. Bank transfers appeared on the screen one after another, spanning years. I didn't add commentary. I didn't explain. I simply let the truth speak in the order it had occurred. He tried to interrupt. His chair scraped loudly as he shifted, his mouth opening, then closing again. No words came out strong enough to stop what was unfolding. I finally spoke again calmly. "For 4 years," I said, "I was generous because I believed I was helping family. But generosity without respect becomes exploitation." I turned slightly toward my daughter. "I didn't want you to learn this way. But you deserve honesty." She stared at the screen, tears welling up, not from embarrassment but from recognition. Pieces of her own confusion were clicking into place. The room was still. No one defended him. No one laughed. No one spoke. I picked up my coat. "One last thing," I said. "Tonight isn't about revenge. It's about boundaries." I looked at him directly. "My support ends here," and then I walked out. Behind me, the image of his carefully built confidence collapsed in real time. The man who had thrived on control and assumption was left exposed, not by accusations, but by his own words and actions. I didn't stay to see the aftermath. I didn't need to. The truth had been delivered exactly where it belonged, under bright lights, in front of witnesses, without distortion. That night, I slept peacefully. Not because I had humiliated someone, but because I had finally spoken without raising my voice, finally acted without anger, and finally reclaimed something far more valuable than money: my self-respect. Walking out of that restaurant felt strangely light, as if I had set down a weight I'd been carrying for years without realizing how heavy it had become. There was no dramatic music, no applause, no shouting behind me. Just the quiet click of the door closing and the steady rhythm of my own steps. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't wondering whether I had done the right thing. I knew I had. The moment I decided my wallet was closed, something inside me opened. Clarity, certainty, and a sense of control I hadn't felt in years. In the days that followed, the change was immediate. My phone, once filled with casual requests disguised as emergencies, went silent. No late-night messages, no anxious calls, no polite check-ins that inevitably led to money. The absence was telling. It confirmed what I had suspected all along: the relationship had been transactional, and once the transaction ended, so did the attention. That realization stung, but it also strengthened my resolve. It reminded me that boundaries reveal truths people try hard to hide. When the first call finally came, it wasn't an apology. It was confusion. He asked if something had gone wrong, if I was upset, if I needed time. The tone was careful, almost professional, as if he were negotiating a delayed payment rather than addressing a fracture he had caused. I listened quietly, then said only one sentence. "I'm no longer funding your life." There was a pause on the line, heavy and unfamiliar. He had never considered this outcome. In his world, my support was permanent, guaranteed, unquestioned. After that, the pressure began. Messages became longer, more emotional. He spoke of stress, of responsibilities, of how difficult things were becoming. He tried to reframe the situation as a misunderstanding, a joke taken too seriously, words said out of context. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I simply repeated the boundary. Each time, my voice was calm. Each time, his frustration grew. Boundaries are hardest for people who benefit most from their absence. My daughter struggled. I could see it in her voice, in the way she hesitated before speaking. She was caught between shock and loyalty, between the life she believed she had and the reality now unfolding in front of her. I made one thing very clear to her from the beginning: my support for her had not changed. I would listen. I would help her think toggled decisions. I would be present. What I would not do was rescue a situation built on dishonesty. Love, I told her, does not mean shielding someone from consequences that are entirely their own. As weeks passed, the effects of the closed wallet became impossible to ignore. Bills went unpaid. Plans were canceled. The confidence he once wore so easily began to crumble. Without my money cushioning his choices, every decision carried weight. Every mistake mattered. He was forced to face the reality he had been avoiding. He had built his life on borrowed stability, and now the borrowing had stopped. There was a moment, about a month in, when he showed up at my door unannounced. He looked smaller somehow, not physically, but in presence. The arrogance was gone, replaced by restlessness. He talked for a long time, circling around apologies without quite landing on one. He spoke of intentions, of pressure, of how things had gotten out of hand. I listened, then told him something he hadn't heard before. Intent doesn't erase impact. I reminded him that respect is not proven by words spoken in crisis, but by behavior shown when no one is watching. I didn't reopen my wallet. I didn't negotiate terms. I didn't offer timelines. I simply closed the door politely and wished him well. That moment, more than the public exposure, marked the real shift in power. He realized then that this wasn't temporary. This wasn't a lesson I would forget once emotions cooled. This was a new reality. In choosing to close my wallet, I didn't punish him. I freed myself. I learned that generosity without boundaries invites exploitation, and that saying no is sometimes the most honest form of love. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was peaceful. And in that peace, I finally understood that dignity is not something others give you. It's something you stop giving away. Expend 6 key point in 800 word without any heading. 3 months is a long time when a carefully constructed life begins to fall apart. I didn't mark the days or wait for the call, but I wasn't surprised when it finally came. The confidence he once carried had dissolved, replaced by a desperation he could no longer hide. When my daughter asked if we could talk, her voice was tired in a way I had never heard before. Not dramatic, not angry, just worn down by reality. They arrived together. That alone told me how bad things had become. The man who once avoided eye contact unless he needed something now sat quietly beside her, hands folded, eyes fixed on the floor. The house they had proudly moved into was gone. Missed payments had piled up faster than excuses could cover them. The business he spoke of so confidently had never truly existed beyond ideas and borrowed time. Friends who enjoyed his generosity vanished when the money dried up. Creditors replaced casual phone calls with formal letters. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "I was wrong," he said. "I disrespected you." No explanations followed. No excuses. Just those words. I listened carefully, not just to what he said, but to what he didn't. There was shame there, real and heavy. Not the embarrassment of being caught, but the exhaustion of someone who had run out of places to hide. My daughter held her hands together tightly, waiting, She wasn't asking me with her words, but with her eyes. She wanted to know if her father would fix this, the way he always had. I took a slow breath. I will help my daughter, I said, and I will help my grandchild when that time comes. He looked up then, hope flickering for the first time. But I will not save you from the consequences of your own choices. The hope vanished. I explained calmly that help without accountability would only repeat the cycle. That real change doesn't come from rescue, but from responsibility. I told him that rebuilding a life requires standing on your own feet, feeling the weight of your decisions, and earning trust rather than demanding it. He nodded, tears forming, but I didn't soften the message. This was not punishment. It was honesty. Turning to my daughter, I reassured her that my door would always be open to her, that she was not responsible for fixing a man who had refused to fix himself for years. That love does not mean sacrificing your well-being to keep someone else comfortable. She cried then, not from loss, but from relief. Relief that someone had finally drawn a line she had been too afraid to draw herself. They left that evening quieter than they arrived. In the weeks that followed, change began. Not dramatic, not instant, but real. He took a job he once would have considered beneath him. He sold things instead of asking for money. He learned to budget because there was no one left to bail him out. My daughter began to smile again, slowly, cautiously. The tension that had lived in her shoulders for years started to ease. As for me, I felt something I hadn't expected: peace without bitterness. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel cruel. I felt settled. For the first time in a long while, my help was a choice again, not an obligation. My relationships were clearer, cleaner, built on honesty rather than assumption. Looking back, I realized the revenge wasn't the exposure or the refusal. It was the boundary. The quiet, unbreakable decision to stop allowing disrespect to disguise itself as family. 3 months after the truth came out, they didn't come back to reclaim my money. They came back to face reality. And in doing so, they gave me something far more valuable than gratitude. They gave me my dignity back.